What would you do if your son's wife called you an ATM? Yes, she called me an old man good for nothing but for paying bills amongst her friends at party. Everyone there laughed, and even my only son laughed with them. He didn't reprimand her, didn't correct her, but he just laughed as if I had become a joke to them. Then I left the party, and their life never remained the same, because I was done being an old fool who was good only for paying bills. Immediately, I got home, my phone kept buzzing. Numerous missed calls from my son, Eric, and his wife, Vanessa. Dad, why are the cards bouncing? I am unable to pay the bills. People are starting to look at me strangely. I replied him, Eric, I stopped being your dad when you laughed with the other people on that table, when your wife called me an ATM. I am done being your ATM. But this wasn't where the story began. To understand how a retired teacher, a man who once lived for his family, came to this point of steel and fire, we have to go back. Back to the night everything changed. The dining room glowed under a crystal chandelier. The air smelled of garlic, butter, and expensive perfume. Joe sat at the far end of the long table, quietly adjusting his cardigan. His son Eric sat at the head with Vanessa by his side, surrounded by her friends in glittering dresses. Dad! Eric called out cheerfully. Glad you made it. Joe smiled faintly. Wouldn't miss it. Smells good in here. Vanessa lifted her wine glass. I worked all day on this spread. I hope everyone appreciates the effort. Her friends gushed with compliments as plates were passed around. Joe ate in silence, nodding politely as the women chattered about handbags and spa days. He didn't belong in their world, but he was used to being the quiet man at the table. Halfway through dinner, Vanessa leaned in, smirking. You all know we couldn't do half of this without Joe. One of the women cooed. That's sweet. A father's love. Vanessa let out a sharp laugh. Oh no, let's be real. Joe's only good for one thing, paying our bills. The table erupted in laughter. Even Eric chuckled, shaking his head. Joe froze. His fork hung midair. He looked at his son, waiting, hoping for him to step in. But Eric only shrugged. She's not wrong, Dad. You've always come through. Guess you just like being the hero. The words hit harder than any insult from a stranger. Joe stared down at his plate, heat rising in his chest. Vanessa wasn't finished. She leaned toward her friends again. I told Eric, it's like having a personal ATM that never runs dry. Honestly, we're spoiled. More laughter. Joe set his fork down gently. The clink of metal on porcelain silenced the table for a moment. He stood, straightening his cardigan. Dinner was lovely, he said softly. His voice was steady, but something dark flickered beneath it. Thank you for having me. Eric frowned. Dad, already? We haven't had dessert. Joe looked at his son, really looked at him. And for the first time, he saw not the boy he raised, but a man who would laugh at his own father's humiliation. I've had my fill, Joe said quietly. The room fell still. Vanessa smirked into her wine. Eric shifted uncomfortably. Joe turned, walked down the hall, and stepped out into the cool night air. He gripped his car door handle, his chest tight. From inside, laughter rose again, muffled by the walls. As he sat behind the wheel, he whispered into the silence. They don't love me, Maggie. Not one bit. His wife's absence weighed heavy in the seat beside him. But tonight, for the first time, Joe felt something stronger than grief. Resolve. Things were about to change. Joe didn't sleep much that night. The house was too quiet, every creak of the floorboards reminding him of Margaret's absence. He sat in his worn armchair, the one where he used to grade essays, staring at her framed photograph on the mantel. Margaret's smile looked back at him, soft, forgiving, the way she always was. Joe leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low and gravelly. They laughed at me, Maggie, said I'm only good for paying bills. Eric, our boy, laughed too. The silence in the room was deafening. He tapped his finger against the armrest. I can't let them keep doing this. Not anymore. By dawn, his mind was made up. The first step was simple. He drove to the bank, his old sedan humming down the road. Mr. Klein, the bank manager, greeted him warmly. Mr. Joe, always a pleasure. What brings you in? Joe adjusted his glasses. I need to close some accounts and cancel a few cards. Effective immediately. Klein raised an eyebrow. Is everything all right? Joe gave a tight smile. Everything's finally right. Paperwork shuffled. Signatures were made. By the time Joe walked out of the bank, his son's access to easy money was gone. The cards Eric loved to swipe declined. The accounts Vanessa treated like her personal shopping fund? Empty. Back home, Joe pulled out his old ledger, a habit from his teaching days when he tracked every penny. He sat at the kitchen table, pen scratching across paper, calculating exactly how much he had spent on Eric and Vanessa over years. The number was staggering. Vacations, rent, cars, even furniture they said they needed. Joe pressed his lips together, anger flaring. Over 100,000, he muttered. I could have built a library wing in Margaret's name with that. The thought sparked something in him. Why not? Why not turn all this wasted generosity into something meaningful? He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began drafting his new will. The bulk of his estate, savings, investments, even the house, would go to a scholarship fund for underprivileged students. It would bear Margaret's name, honoring the woman who had stood by him through lean years and hard times. His sister Helen would get a share too, enough to live comfortably. Eric? He'd get $1, just enough to prove he hadn't been forgotten, but not enough to matter. Satisfied, Joe picked up the phone and dialed his lawyer, Mr. Henson. Joe, been a while, Henson said cheerfully. What can I do for you? Joe's voice was steady. I need to update my will, and I need it airtight, ironclad. My son, he's not going to like what I've decided. Henson paused, then his tone turned serious. Understood. When can you come in? Tomorrow, Joe replied. The sooner, the better. That night, Joe cooked himself a simple dinner, eggs and toast, the way Margaret used to make when she was tired. As he ate, the phone rang. He knew who it would be. Eric's voice came through the line, sharp with irritation. Dad? My card just got declined. What's going on? Joe took a slow sip of water before answering. I closed the accounts. There was a pause. Then Eric laughed, forced and incredulous. You what? Dad, come on. That's not funny. Vanessa and I were at lunch with her mother. I looked like an idiot. Joe's voice was calm, almost too calm. You look like the man you become. Dependent. Entitled. I won't fund it anymore. Eric's tone hardened. You can't just cut me off. I'm your son. Joe's hand tightened around the receiver. You're my son, Eric. But you stopped being family the moment you mocked me with strangers. I was never your father in that moment. Just your ATM. Eric sputtered. Dad, you're overreacting. Vanessa didn't mean it like that. I heard enough. Joe cut in. This conversation is over. And with that, he hung up. His hand shook slightly as he placed the receiver down, but inside, a strange calm washed over him. For the first time in years, Joe felt like he was no longer being drained. This was just the beginning. The days that followed were strangely quiet for Joe. He woke up early, made his coffee the way Margaret used to, and sat by the window watching the world move outside. For once, he felt in control. But the calm never lasts long when money is involved. By the third day, the storm came. Eric showed up unannounced, pounding on the door until wood rattled. Joe opened it slowly, leaning on a frame with deliberate calm. Dad, what the hell? Eric pushed past him into the living room, without waiting for an invitation. His face was flushed, jaw tight. You cut off everything. The accounts, the cards, Vanessa's furious. You've embarrassed me. Joe closed the door quietly. You embarrass yourself. I just stopped paying for it. Eric spun around. Do you realize what you've done? Rent is due next week. The car lease. Vanessa's mom is talking about how he humiliated her at lunch. Joe cut him off with a sharp look. I'm not responsible for your pride or your bills. Eric's eyes narrowed. Maybe you've lost your mind. Vanessa said it. You're not thinking clearly anymore. Maybe you shouldn't be handling finances at all. Joe's jaw tightened. There it was, the veiled threat, a common tactic. paint the old man as senile, unfit, and take control of everything. He sat down slowly in his armchair, meeting Eric's glare with steady eyes. I taught history for 35 years, son. I may walk slower now, but I haven't forgotten how people grab for power when they smell weakness. He leaned forward, and I'm telling you, I'm not weak. Eric faltered, just slightly, before masking it with anger. You're being ridiculous. Vanessa and I gave up so much to take care of you. Joe barked a humorless laugh. Take care of me? You've been draining me dry. Your mother used to say, Eric always takes the longest spoon at the table. She was right. Eric stiffened. Careful what you say, Dad. Words like that, people might think you're paranoid. If a court hears you're unstable, they'll hand everything over to me. Joe smiled thinly. I've already scheduled a psychological evaluation. Doctor's going to write me a nice letter saying I'm fit as ever. You won't take me down that road. Eric froze, his mouth half open. He hadn't expected that. Joe continued, voice cold now. And I've met with my lawyer. My will has already changed. Margaret's name will live on through scholarships for children who actually work hard. Children who remind me of the students I used to teach, not freeloaders. Eric's fists clenched. You'd rather give it all to strangers in your own blood? Joe stood, towering even with age. Blood means nothing if it poisons a body. You chose Vanessa's laughter over my dignity. That day you stopped being my son. Eric's face twisted with rage. He grabbed his coat and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. For a long time, Joe stood in the silence, hands trembling. It hurt. God, it hurt to say those words to his own child. But it also felt like Margaret was standing behind him, whispering, it's about time. 2 days later, Joe received a letter slipped under his door. It wasn't handwritten. It was typed, clean, threatening. Mr. Joseph Miller. This is to inform you that your recent actions may constitute financial abuse against your dependent son and daughter-in-law. Should this behavior continue, we will be forced to pursue legal action to claim what rightfully belongs to family. It wasn't signed, but Joe knew whose hand was behind it. He set the letter down on the table, exhaled, and whispered to himself, so that's how far you'll go, Eric. But instead of fear, Joe felt something else stir in his chest. A strange fire, almost like the thrill of preparing for a lecture in his teaching days. His mind sharpened, his resolve deepened. If his son wanted a war, Joe was ready, and he would fight not with fists, not with noise, but with patience, strategy, and ironclad preparation, because he knew something Eric didn't. Joe had one final move that would end this battle for good. A week passed before the knock came again. This time it wasn't Eric. It was Vanessa. She stood at the door in a sleek coat, her makeup immaculate, a smile painted on like a mask. Joe almost admired how well she could disguise poison as charm. Almost. Joe, she said sweetly, may I come in? I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot. Joe let her in but said nothing. He simply sat in his armchair, waiting. Vanessa walked around the living room as if inspecting a house for sale. You know, Eric's very upset. He says you don't trust him anymore. That's hard for a son to accept. You've made him feel unwanted, unloved, and after all we've done for you. Joe cut her off with a dry chuckle. Done for me? You mean the bills I paid? The food I bought? The roof you live under? Remind me again, Vanessa, who's been doing for who? Her smile faltered, just slightly, before she recovered. She perched on the edge of the sofa and leaned in. We don't have to fight. Eric and I can still take care of you. Make sure you're never alone. Isn't that what you really want? Family. Joe studied her for a long moment. Then he leaned forward and whispered, Do you really think I don't hear you, Vanessa? The way you talk about me behind my back? Only good for paying the bills. That's all I ever was to you. For the first time, Vanessa's mask slipped. Her eyes hardened. You should be careful, Joe. Courts are very sympathetic to younger families these days, especially when an old man is confused. If Eric files for guardianship, it won't take long before everything is in our hands. Joe's lips curled into the faintest smile. I was a teacher for 35 years. Vanessa, I've read every kind of essay, Every excuse, every attempt to twist the truth. You know what I learned? The truth always shows through the cracks. He stood and handed her a sealed envelope from the table. This is for you. Vanessa frowned, suspicious, and opened it. Inside was a formal notice from Joe's lawyer. His will had been officially changed. His account were secured. His assets placed in a trust. And attached was a psychological evaluation confirming his full mental capacity. Her face went pale. You can't do this. I already did, Joe said simply. And if you try to challenge me, I have hours of recordings. Every insult, every laugh at my expense, every threat. Vanessa's jaw clenched. You'll regret this. Joe shook his head. No, Vanessa. For the first time in years, I won't. The final act unfolded faster than even Joe expected. A month later, Eric and Vanessa were summoned to court. Joe had taken the letter they'd sent him, the veiled threats and financial history of their dependents, and turned it all over to his lawyer. The judge didn't need long to see what was happening. Mr. Miller, the judge said gravely, looking at Eric, this is not care. This is exploitation. Financial elder abuse is a crime. Eric sputtered. Vanessa tried to spin a story about misunderstandings and family obligations, but the evidence was too strong. Their laughter, their greed, their manipulations, all of it laid bare in the courtroom. By the end of the trial, Eric and Vanessa were ordered to repay what they had taken and sentenced to community service for elder abuse. Their reputations shattered, their credit ruined. As I walked out of that courtroom with his head high, I felt lighter than he had in years. No, I didn't have Margaret by my side. No, I didn't have a son I once dreamed Eric would become. But I had my dignity, my freedom, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing justice had the final word. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat once more in my armchair. I poured himself a glass of wine and whispered softly into the stillness. Margaret, we did it. They won't hurt me anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled, not the smile of a tired old man, but of someone who had finally, truly won.